Welcome! In this episode of Arcana Orbis, The Secrets of the World, we shall see if there is any substance behind the quite long-standing idea that Pharaoh Akhenaten and the great Hebrew leader Moses was the same man. One of the first to stress this idea was the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who in 1939 published his book Moses and Monotheism. He based his idea partly on his colleague Otto Rank's theories of Moses' family in Egypt, which he wrote in his book Myth of the Birth of the Hero from 1909. In 1904, a very famous Egyptologist from England, Sir Flinders Petrie, was commissioned by the Egypt Exploration Fund to explore the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula and the traces of the biblical Mount Sinai, sometimes referred to as Gebel Musa, Moses Mountain, or simply Mount Horeb. By the turquoise mines at Serabit El-Khadim, next to Mount Horeb, Petrie found an unknown temple dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Among the discoveries were votive carvings in Proto-Sinaitic style dedicated to Hathor. Dated to around 1700 to 1400 BCE, they can very well have inspired much later trading Israelites who were camping in the nearby oasis of Pharaoh to create the story of the Hebrews worshipping the golden calf. The myth tells of how Hathor gave birth to the sun every morning as a golden calf, and amalgamation of gods and myths were common enough in that time to suggest such a thing. In early 1300s BCE, Pharaoh Akhenaten was born as Amenhotep, and he lived around the same time as Moses supposedly did. Akhenaten did call himself the golden calf, thus using the myth of the newborn son of Hathor, but here he meant that he was the son of the sun god Aten, hence his name Akhenaten, the living spirit of Aten. The god Aten was introduced in Egypt as the only accepted god by Pharaoh Akhenaten and his wife Queen Nefertiti, and they forbade every other god to be worshipped, thus making the powerful polytheistic priests superfluous and out of work. There are credible suggestions that Queen Nefertiti might have ruled Egypt sometime after Akhenaten's death, which occurred sometime between 1336 and 1334 BCE. The widowed Queen Nefertiti might have taken power over Egypt since their son and heir to the throne was an infant and too young to rule. This would have been the natural order of succession according to dynastic practice. The title Pharaoh means the great house, which was implemented by Akhenaten as a descriptive term of his dynasty, of the henceforth inheritable throne by his descendants. This was likely one of the reasons why he became hated by the elite classes in Egypt. The nobility, the clergy, and the military leaders all wanted Akhenaten off the throne, as he took all political, military, and religious powers for himself. In addition, it is a confirmed fact that their son was the famous Tutankhamun, or more commonly known as Tutankhamun, who reigned for a few years and then died in 1332 BCE. He was, during Akhenaten's reign, named Tutankhaten, but was probably more or less forced to change his name to Tutankhamun to accommodate the sun god Amun's powerful priesthood. The old polytheistic religion was back, and his father's Aten religion was banned. The religion around the sun god Aten was completely unknown to the Western historians in the 19th century, when they started to piece the complex Egyptian history puzzle together. So, in 1891, when Sir Flinders Petrie and his team stumbled upon the Aten temple in the ruins of the city Akhenaten, the world was baffled. the Egyptian history had to be rewritten. More and more they unraveled the significance of this dynasty of Pharaoh Akhenaten, whose name had been fallen into oblivion for 16 centuries. This was due to the actions by the later ruler and pharaoh, the military commander Horemheb, who ordered that every trace of the Akhenaten dynasty would be erased. Immediately after the discoveries by Petrie, some scholars saw the obvious connections between the so-called Atenism and monotheism. Moses, who introduced the only God of Israel to the polytheistic Hebrews in their exodus out of Egypt, received, according to the tradition, a message from the Lord that his chosen people was not allowed to worship any other deities but himself, thus acknowledging that there were other gods around at the time. In the new Aten religion there is no evidence of denying other deities, only that it was a sort of official religion where devotion to other gods and goddesses were forbidden. In private, though, there is evidence that people in all social classes worshipped other deities. We know that Akhenaten composed the great hymn to Aten, and many scholars point to the similarity between this prayer and Psalm 104 in the Old Testament, and they are truly comparable. The psychological factors behind why Akhenaten, as a newly installed pharaoh, did implement a totally different style of deity and religion around it can be traced to his father's Amenhotep III's marriage to the daughter of the chief minister, the Israelite Yusuf-Yuya, more commonly known as Joseph. It is very likely that a young Akhenaten was influenced by Yusuf-Yuya's religion, which told of a supreme father in heaven. However, there could be another story to tell here. The daughter of Yusuf-Yuya was named Tiye, and hers and Pharaoh Amenhotep III's son could not inherit the throne since she was not of royal blood. But due to Yusuf-Yuya's importance and length of governorship, stretching over several pharaohs, there was fear of Yusuf-Yuya being too important and that he was gaining too much power in Egypt. Now, think about this. The legend about Moses, which relate that he was sent away in a basket on the river Nile to escape from being killed as a threat to the reigning pharaoh, might have been a reality. If so, it is only the identity of the boy that has been changed, deliberately or not. Akhenaten's mother, Tiye, is supposed to have had a summer house in Zaro in the Nile Delta in the region of Goshen, and here she went to have her baby away from all threats to its life. Because researchers have found that Tiye knew what might happen to her baby, since many among the palace officials talked about killing it if it was a boy. We all know what happened next in the Moses story. The boy escaped and was adopted by a daughter to the pharaoh, but nursed by an Israelite woman. The mother of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the very real Tiye, had her child nursed by an Israelite woman, and no one suspected anything, and the boy survived. After some entanglements, Tiye's son Amenhotep became the successor of Amenhotep III, and he soon changed his name. The reason was maybe to suit his personal religious ideas, which was influenced by the Israelite Lord, or as he was named in his mother's Hebrew language, Adon. It might be so that since Akhenaten's part Israelite upbringing, he could not tolerate the many gods and goddesses of the Egyptian society. But he also saw that his power as a pharaoh would not be so strong as his predecessors had been. And that combination led to the decision to throw out the old gods and introduce one single Lord and start a new religion of which he would be the supreme priest. This is much the same development described in the Bible about the events on Mount Sinai, where Moses told the Israelites about the Lord, and his decree that they could not worship any other god. Moses acted as the Israelites' religious leader, as God only spoke via him to the people. When the Israelites revolted and made the golden calf, Moses slew many thousands of them until they submitted to the new God. Moses also implemented the old Egyptian custom of circumcision. The name Aten was equivalent with the Hebrew Adon, meaning Lord, and the very familiar Adonai meant my Lord. The purely phonetic similarity between Adon and Aten is probably more than coincidental, and is showing that the inhabitants of Egypt were living in reciprocity and respectful linguistic mixing. According to some scholars, the name Moses derives from the Egyptian word Mose, meaning heir or offspring, as in Tutmose or Amen-Mose. The English name Moses is pronounced Moshe in modern Hebrew. This shows that very little has changed, since in many languages they still say Mose, and in Arabic they say Musa. Some years after building and moving his royal household to the new city Akhenaten, which he placed exactly in the middle of the Egyptian kingdom, he was forced off the throne and, as the theory goes, went into exile in Sinai as Mose, the rightful heir. After many years in exile, he went back to Egypt to rescue the now oppressed Israelites, and with 3 magical tricks, or so-called miracles, he managed to convince the vast population of Egyptian Israelites who had lived in Egypt for so many generations that he was Mose, their rightful king and royal descendant. Is everything in this story about Moses and Akhenaten mere coincidence? Their names, how similar their lives developed from the very beginning, everything about the similarities of the names for the Lord and how the other gods were banned, how the Israelites started to worship the golden calf instead of the supreme God? Or have we all been purposely duped? Have we all been led behind the light by the first writers of the Old Testament who lived in the first kingdom of Israel 400 years after these related events? Those writers and their king would probably not have liked to put the story on parchment that their great historical prophet and forefather had been a pharaoh, a king and a leader of the despised enemy. And the later compilers of the Bible in the 5th century BCE probably saw the similarities between the Babylonian captivity and the alleged sufferings in Egypt by the Israelites. They certainly could not have comprehended any notion of the fact that the people of Israel might have been worshipping for nearly a millennia the memory of the rightful heir to the throne of the hated Egyptians.